Hey, White Sox fans, it's Crystal O'Keefe with episode 12 of Visiting Dugout, brought to you by the Southside Sox, a part of Fans First Sports Network. Today on the show, I have Kevin O'Brien. He's a Royals reporter for SABR and a fantasy baseball contributor for Pitcher List. He's here to talk about the team he knows best, the Royals. So, Kevin, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Crystal. My name's Kevin, and again, I run the RoyalsReporter.com at RoyalsReporter.com, I guess, and I'm also on Twitter at RoyalReportKev. So I've been running that blog since about 2019, and I also write for Pitcher List for the Going Deep section, kind of with a focus with deep analysis on players and trends, as well as for the weekly Batters Box column. So I'm just happy to be here and happy to talk Royals baseball, even though it's kind of hard to do so with only 8 wins this year.
Hey, I feel ya. Nice to also have a fellow Pitcher List person. You are the second from that site to come join me. That's
Awesome.
always fun. All right, so let's get into the ugly. So the Royals are sitting just below the White Sox in the AL Central. You guys, at the time of recording, are 8-24. You're 2 games back from the White Sox at 10 games back from 500. So, what on earth is going on in Kansas City?
I think what we're seeing is we're seeing finally a pure rebuild. I think under the last few years under Dayton Moore, the Royals as a small market team, they're not going to be overspending, to compete with like the Cardinals or the Cubs or the Yankees of the world. So under former executive Dayton Moore, the whole process was kind of building through the draft, building through the farm system, building through player development. But since 2018, that just hadn't worked. And a new owner took over prior to the 2020 season and kind of decided that, it was time for a change. It wasn't a huge change with them going with with promoting their kind of assistant executive vice president, but it was still a change nonetheless. A new manager, Matt Quatraro, who's a lot different than previous manager Mike Matheny and Ned Yost, who were more old school, a lot more analytics kind of focus in Kansas City. But it's a young roster, and it's a young roster that's kind of been taking their lumps, especially on the hitting end. And the pitching end, they're trying to kind of salvage anything they can, and it hasn't been totally successful. They have some reclamation projects in the bullpen with Aroldis Chapman, as well as Josh Taylor from the Red Sox and Amir Garrett, formerly of the Reds, and it just hasn't been a cohesive group and a cohesive start. Though there are some positive signs from this last Orioles series, even though they lost 2 out of 3.
Yeah, you guys did actually play pretty well against the Orioles, who have been strangely really hot so far this season. So you mentioned your prospects. I was kind of looking up a little of them earlier, and it looked like Caden Wallace looked pretty good. But do you have some more hope in these prospects that will be coming through, especially during a kind of rebuild time period?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was one of the thing that kind of got was the final straw for kind of Dayton Moore was kind of the struggles in pitching development throughout the system last year, especially at AA, kind of heralded prospects like Alec Marsh, Anthony Veneziano, who were kind of top 10, top 20 kind of prospects in the Royals system, depending on what you looked at, whether Baseball America or Pipeline or whatever. They really have rough years. And, we've seen a lot of positive gains in the lower levels this year. Frank Mazzucato, who is a 2021 number 8 overall pick, has gone off to a great start. You were seeing some great production in Colombia, the low A team, with both their pitchers as well as their hitters. Daniel Vasquez, who was a highly heralded international signing shortstop, has got off to a really strong start this year, as Eric Pena, who is a highly sought-after international signing, has kind of struggled, but he's still shown immense power. And then we talked about Caden Wallace in, I believe he's in high A Quad Cities, and he's doing really well. And Gavin Cross, who was kind of the consensus number 1 pick, has gotten off to a slow start, but he's starting to kind of turn it around. And so I think when you look at like AA or to high A to low A, there's a lot of good stories. Omaha's kind of a mixed bag. The pitching is not doing well there, but you're seeing a lot better pitching in the AA to low A, which was something we weren't seeing a year ago. So I think there's some good depth. I don't know if there's any high-end talent. I don't think there's any, but I might think there's not much top 100 guys, maybe other than Caden Wallace and Gavin Cross, if he can turn it around. But I think they're in good shape, and I think if they make some trades, they can kind of restock the system pretty soon.
Yeah, that's good. So I know you and I are probably more bleak with this question, but where do you see the Royals kind of sitting mid-season, but then again at the end of the season, say like September?
I think I'm always tend to be more of an optimistic Royals fan, and I kind of was optimistic about this group winning somewhere around the 72 to 75 wins. I think I've kind of like been a little bit more realistic now. I would say 60 wins honestly would be kind of an accomplishment, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I wrote a post for the RoyalsReporter.com last night. And one of the things I think you look at rebuilds with the Orioles and the Astros is, they kind of tanked in getting those top 3 picks. And when you have opportunities to get multiple top 3 picks, you're going to hit because those are elite prospects. You're going to get Adley Rutschmans, or you're going to get Carlos Correas, or you're going to get Alex Bregmans. That's a lot harder to do when you have it like the 5, 6, 7 pick. I mean, not saying that you can't find talent there, but I think there's a big gap between like a number 8 pick and a number 1 pick. And I think the Royals really need to do that. I think the front office is willing to do that. I think the owner is willing to foster that. He wants to build this team like the Rays, the Guardians. He was a minority owner with the Cleveland Guardians prior. And so I think he wants to build it that way. I just don't know if Royals fans will have the patience because, Kansas City, it's like, hey, you got the Chiefs. This team won in 2015. They want to win. And so it'll be interesting to see if Royals fans will be patient through this process.
Yeah, I was down at the Slugger Museum in 2015, the year they won, because they always update with the current world champion, and they have like this little nice corner of just all the displays and bats. Excuse me.
Yeah, sorry.
That was fun to see.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of great things to see for sure. But it'll be interesting. I think this franchise is definitely at a crossroads. So
yeah. So after, this first kind of month, we're in May now. Do you have an MVP candidate for the Royals for your first month? Like, who do you feel like is doing the best right now?
I mean, that's a tough one, I think, because I think it depends on the week. If you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said, probably maybe Bobby Wood Jr. And then, he goes on a slump and, and then, you could also, but I would say probably right now, without a doubt, probably Vinny Pasquantino. Vinny Pasquantino has done everything that we kind of saw in his half rookie year last year. He doesn't strike out a lot. He walks a lot. He makes contact. He hits for power. He gets on base. He drives and runs. He kind of does it all. And we've kind of been, it's really surprising. And he's been like a huge leader in this clubhouse. I was able to go to a Royals rally in the preseason, and he's got such an infectious personality and energy, and he's just a really likable player. But you could just tell that even though he's only around 24, 25 years old, other than Salvador Perez, he has command of that clubhouse. And I think that's a really key thing. I think it's going to be a priority for the Royals to sign him to a long-term extension at some point, because I think he's a really special player who could be to Kansas City what Joey Votto is to Cincinnati.
Yeah, of course. So I saw, just yesterday, Kyle Isbell, he's had a slow start. Then he started trending a little higher, and then boom, he's on the injury list. How bad is that injury, for this team right now?
I think it's tough because one thing we're seeing a lot with the Royals, whether it's on a pitching or a hitting end, is the depth is kind of questionable. Especially from what's on their current roster. At the beginning of the year, it seemed like center field was going to be an area of depth with not just Kyle Isbell, but Drew Waters, who came over from Atlanta in a trade and really turned it around. After kind of getting blocked by Michael Harris in Atlanta, he came to Kansas City and looked like a completely different prospect. But he hurt his oblique in spring training. He's in extended spring training currently. And, Kyle Isbell's got off to a slow start, starts to turn around, and, of course, has an injury. And right now they're kind of stuck with Jackie Bradley Jr., who's looks a lot different from what his Boston days, at least on the offensive end. And Nate Eaton just got called up again, and Nate Eaton's a fantastic, fun player to watch. But he's not hitting. And I think he has a 0.46 average OBP. I think he's only got on base a couple times. He's a great utility player, but – he hasn't really shown it with the bat. So, but, he was doing a little bit better in Omaha. So we're hoping that, he can come in, fill in for Kyle in center field so they don't have to rely too much on Jackie Bradley Jr. During this stretch of time.
That's good. So, you have got some big retirements that have been recently announced. I know Matt Harvey is more a Met than anything, but he was there for a year with you guys. But then, kind of more importantly, Lorenzo Cain, who was there for 13 seasons, and you guys are doing something incredibly nice for him for that retirement. So how are fans feeling about, especially Lorenzo Cain, because I know he was kind of like the heart and soul of that team for a long time.
I think we're excited. I mean, it's I'm going to be going to that game, and the Royals really haven't sold out a lot of games, this year beyond opening day. So, but apparently, it sounds like this is going to be a sellout, and for good reason. I think Lorenzo Cain. I mean, obviously, what he did during that run, and but for him to be like, hey, like still like, hey, I want to retire as a Royal, and he had very good years with the Brewers. It wasn't like all his years there were rough. He had his first couple years in Milwaukee were great, and I have friends who are Brewers fans and like him. But I think that just kind of shows you like how starved this team is for a winner. It's just like I mean, unfortunately, it's like that's what we're hanging our hat on is kind of this 2015, 2014 teams, and we had Ned Yost. He got elected into the Royals Hall of Fame, and that's going to be a big deal. So I think it's for a team that's really has won 8 games and is going through a really tough rebuild. Obviously, Lorenzo Cain brings a breath of fresh air, and them being able to do that, and especially it was kind of tough with Alex Gordon not really getting that retirement because he retired in 2020 during COVID, and so I think that Cain will kind of get a proper send off, without all those restrictions is going to be a really cool thing.
That's good. All right, we're going to take just a really quick break to pay some bills, and then we will be back to break down this series. And we are back. I am here to talk about the Royals with Kevin. So, how this upcoming series, the White Sox finally broke their losing streak and finally won their first series in May. But the Royals, are dealing with some of the same struggles. So, how do you feel going into this series with a team that they're pretty evenly matched at this point?
I really am interested in this series. I do have some tickets to at least one of the games, and I think the series is interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. You have you have a former bench coach for the Royals, manager for the White Sox, as well as a former hitting coach who was really credited for turning around Salvador Perez and Jorge Soler when they were in Kansas City. I know there was a lot of people who thought Grifol should have been the manager for the Royals instead of Cucharo. But it's gone both. It's gone bad for both. So you can't really say, you can't really say one's been doing better than the other. So, I think it's really tough because I think it's you've had the White Sox who kind of went through a mini rebuild, have kind of built a lot through this talent, and it's a lot of it's been injuries, and I think that's what's hard with the White Sox. At least you can kind of hang your hat as like they've had a lot of bad injury luck. Whether it just seems as soon as Yoan Moncada is going to turn it around, something happens, or just any guy on the White Sox, something happens. And, you can't really say that with the Royals. But, it also does seem like the Royals White Sox, it always feels very even, and there's always kind of an edge to that series. As much as as a Royals fan, I'd rather not have Tim Anderson in the lineup. It is going to be more fun to see Tim Anderson play and make it a more competitive series than Tim Anderson hurt. So, I'm excited for that, and I see him. And also, I'm a big Eloy Jimenez fan too, and he was a guy that I thought would do well under Grifol, and now that he seems like he's healthy, he's kind of turning around again. So it'll be really interesting because I know when I saw Jimenez in 2019, he probably hit one of the furthest home runs I've ever seen at Kauffman Stadium. So not saying I want that this series, but I'm just saying there's an impressive group, and I think the pitching will have their hands full, I think, for the Royals. And then that will be really interesting to see how they react on the pitching end, because that's been kind of their Achilles heel all year long.
Yeah, you'll go through, I think, Dylan Cease and Lucas Giolito. And I'm pretty sure you at least faced those two. I can't remember what end we're at for the other. But, Tim Anderson, you guys seem to have a bit of a history with Tim Anderson.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, just with Brad Keller and Tim Anderson, just with that whole beef, and then and it's weird because the Royals and White Sox do have a lot of weird history. You have like the Tom Gamboa incidents where like the the father and son charge the field, and you had some Yordano Ventura drama where they had gotten a fight. I remember like Samardzija and somebody else were getting at it, so it's like so it was yeah.
I try to repress Jeff Samardzija in my
Yes,
brain.
it was an interesting era between the White Sox and the Royals, though it seems like it's cooled off, I'd say, the last few years.
Yeah, they're fun. Tim has grown up a little. Not saying he was the only issue, but he has grown up a little. So, what do you think your keys are for the Royals to take the series? Because I know you said pitching is going to have their hands full. So, your keys are kind of the biggest threat right now that the Royals have against this White Sox team.
Well, I think what's really interesting is from an offensive end, they're built like they have a lot of the same flaws. They swing a lot, they chase a lot. If you look at swing percentage, the White Sox and the Royals rank both near the bottom in terms of like, hey, the highest swings outside the strike zone. So I think that's going to be the key of the series. Who's going to be more disciplined in this series? And are the White Sox? They obviously have the power, but they're prone to swinging out of the zone. And same thing with the Royals. Royals have shown some improvement lately, and I think the White Sox have too. I think that's going to be big in terms of the pitching matchups because the Royals, they don't have a lot of pitchers who generate a lot of chases. Zach Greinke is kind of more of a contact guy at this point of his career. Jordan Lyles eats innings and throws strikes, but he gives up a lot of home runs, and so that's kind of going to be a challenge. And Brad Keller has been having a hard time finding the strike zone, and Brady Singer, when he's on, he's great, but he hasn't been on very much this year. And so, and then I don't even know what they're doing with the 5-spot because since Chris Buich got hurt, they've kind of been doing a little rotating thing with Ryan Yarbrough in some kind of capacity. So I guess that's going to be my key is like who's going to be chasing more. And I guarantee that whoever is chasing less is probably going to be the one that's winning this series at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think our number one chaser, it was just announced today that Luis Robert Jr. is doing a rehab stint because he's been playing really injured. And I feel like he just chases some of the worst pitches. So maybe there's hope.
No, I know it feels that way with a lot of our guys too. So it's more of a collective effort, like in Kansas City's end. So,
yeah. Speaking of hope, can you give White Sox fans some more hope about Andrew Benintendi? Because I feel like he's been really hot and cold, and I think fans here just have a lot of mixed feelings about him because I think they hated him for so long that maybe they don't see his value.
With Benny, I was a fan of Benny here. I think the power is going to come around at some point. And I know that he had showed some power his first year in Kansas City in 2021. And then it seemed he kind of like abandoned that approach for more a high contact line drive approach, which, helped him hit 300. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of times when I'm seeing him, he's still like almost like he's trying to hit at Kaufman and not at his field. And I think once he gets into his groove and starts to tap into that home run power again, I think you'll see his value go up a lot. I think, defensively, I think he's solid. He won a Gold Glove in 2021. Mm-hmm. It seems like he's staying healthy now. That was a big issue in Boston. In Kansas City, he had a small stretch where he was hurt in 2021, but he stayed healthy for the Royals in 2022, and then he went to the Yankees and then got hurt. Yeah. But it's, but I get it. I get like you're like when you're saying, hey, he's got the biggest, deal in White Sox history, and it's Andrew Benintendi. Like I know it's like, hey, like this sounds kind of weird. But, I do think he's a consistent and he kind of gives a lot with the high chase and the high and the high strikeout tendencies of some of the hitters for the White Sox. I think he balances that out well. And once those high strikeout hitters kind of come through, that was one of the things, and I don't have the stats, but it seemed like Benintendi was a very strong RBI machine when he was in Kansas City. And I think once you see more consistency from other players in the lineup, I think you'll see that's where Benintendi will shine a lot more.
I personally like him. I don't have any issues with him. He had a phenomenal game the other night. He stole a very big, very important home run with just this incredible catch. Like it looked like he was like floating. And then he also scored the, walk-off run for the White Sox to actually finally win a series. So I have hope for him. But yeah, some people are just very iffy on him.
Yeah. Well, it's May. It's early May. There's still a lot of time here. So.
A lot of people refuse to acknowledge, hey, it's May, maybe pump the brakes.
Exactly.
It's all doom and gloom when your team's down bad.
Oh yeah, it's same here in Kansas City. So
before I let you go, let's just talk kind of Major League Baseball in general, because you do follow a lot of players, you follow a lot of teams. So your thoughts kind of going through this season, like teams that you see going all the way, or teams that might just kind of be a dark horse that we should be worried about, or teams that you might predict are going to crash hard pretty soon.
I think I think the Central Division is going to be fascinating, and I think as bad as it is for the White Sox and the Royals, even the Twins, who are obviously the best team right now, it does feel like, hey, they're one injury away, like one Byron Buxton injury away from kind of sneaking back to the middle of the pack. The Guardians have not been very impressive. This year, the Tigers, it feels like they're overperforming. Like you look at their roster every day, you look at the fact their pitching rotation, and they're still they're still winning games, but you feel it's very fluky. So I think the Central is going to be a really wild race. I wouldn't be surprised if the White Sox are the ones in first place in September, just because I think it's just so crazy. And, I think it's just we're seeing so many injuries, and especially on a pitching end. And I know that we don't have all the data, but it's like at least we're seeing some correlation that with this new pitch clock, it's having an effect on some pitchers. And we're seeing a lot of pitchers who are expected to be really big contributors, and they're on the IL, and some for like the whole year. And so I think that's good. I think that's going to be really interesting to keep watch of, because, it's like pitchers, they're such a valuable, assets to teams these days, and they are paid so much. And what's that going to do for the future of pitchers and for these teams that, like, hey, I'm not going to, like, our pitchers are going to get more prone to hurt. Like, I'm not going to pay that Justin Verlander money anymore, or that Max Scherzer money anymore. And Verlander's only made one start this year, and that's it's a shame because he's so fun to watch, but it's just a concern that I've been seeing, and I'm curious to see what's going to happen for other teams. And I think that's just going to be the big thing, is who has the depth to get through this.
Yeah, I was watching that Mets Tigers game the other night, and it was, it felt like he was just welcomed back with open arms, because, Detroit loves him. Detroit loves to kind of hang on to these people that are no longer and have been away forever.
Right.
But it was like he was welcomed with open arms, and then boom, 2 back-to-back home runs out of just nowhere. And then they couldn't get past that. They ended up sweeping the Mets in that doubleheader. So it's been jarring to see.
Yeah, I know, for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any like dark horse teams, and even just outside of the Central? Because again, like the Orioles have been really hot, the Pirates have been really hot. Don't know what's going on in the world.
I think one of the teams I really like. I mean, I really like the Diamondbacks. I think the Diamondbacks are the case example of, like, this is what happens when you have depth, and when you have depth and you build and you kind of draft well and stock talent, this is what happens. And I think we're another team that I feel is very fascinating too is the Miami Marlins. I kind of looked into them and thinking they were going to kind of be on the Royals level. It was like, I'm not sure what they're doing necessarily. And, they've made some shrewd moves, like Luis Arias was a great move. And, they've really weathered that storm with adding pitching depth and getting AJ Puck for JJ Bleday, and kind of saying, hey, this is a guy we really don't need, and let's grab a kind of high upside arm. And they've weathered that storm. And so, and I feel like the East is kind of iffy too. Like, I mean, I'm not sure with the Mets getting hit by injury after injury. And Atlanta is Atlanta, but after that, it's the Phillies don't look the same, and obviously the Nationals are the Nationals. So it's like, could Miami be this year's Baltimore? It feels a lot like that, and so that's why I kind of like them as well in that division.
And the Mets or not the Mets, the Yankees are in last.
Yes,
in their division, which it's a wild start to baseball for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like everything is affected, like these new rules, they're having an effect, and some good and some not so good.
Yeah. I'm in favor of the pitch clock, but I have noticed that some guys are just still really trying to work with it and can't quite grasp it. I know, especially in relief pitching, that's where I kind of see it the most, is the relievers that come in. But
yeah, I love it as a fan, and as I work in education, so obviously, like, hey, I have to go to school and things like that, and so like going to a Wednesday night game. I was at the Royals Orioles game, and it clocked in at an hour 59. Like, that is wonderful. Like, I can go to a game, it's out, I can get home at a decent hour and go to bed at a decent hour. Like, that's to me, I'm all for that, and it doesn't feel like anything is watered down. It doesn't feel like I'm getting less baseball. So I'm a big fan of the pitch clock.
Yeah, I think it'll really be noticeable. The White Sox will be on the West Coast coming up pretty soon, and I have a lot of coverage for those games. So we're going to see how much I really love that pitch clock after, I'm up until 2 a.m. writing articles. So
exactly. That we just had an Angels series, and it was, when they're starting at 9 p.m., you're just like, thank God for this pitch clock, because otherwise it'd be like a midnight or 1 o'clock ending. So
yeah, brutal. All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. Here's your chance to kind of plug yourself. I know we've mentioned what you're working on, but, plug it again, plug your socials, where everybody can find you.
Awesome. Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at Royal Report Kev. So capital R, capital K. Again, you can find my Royals work at theroyalsreporter.com. And you can also find my fantasy baseball work with the Going Deep section, as well as the Batters Box section at pitcherlist.com. And so those are some of the places where you can find my work. And we'll probably, when school ends, I'll probably be contributing even more, because I won't be having to deal with students all day. So.
Understandable. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck to you in this series.
Awesome. Thanks. And I look forward to a fun series. Somebody's got to win. So
I don't know, maybe.